Hey everyone, Mike here in the BFH garage. Today I'm going to show you how to replace your clock spring. Now your clock spring goes behind your steering wheel. It's located right in this general area, and it is responsible for sending electronic signals to things like your horn, your airbag, if you have cruise control, things like that. Here's the new clock spring, and the way this works is you have wires here, and inside this, black box there is like a wire tape that allows you to turn the steering wheel without breaking that wire connection, and that's really important. So the reason I'm replacing mine is my Jeep has been throwing a couple codes. My airbag light has been on since I've installed this steering column into this Jeep. Now for those of you that haven't caught up with the channel yet, I rolled my last Jeep. I took the steering column from my 2000, I put it into this 98 because the 98 had some bad bearings on it. So I swapped it completely over. And my guess is my clock spring was damaged during that rollover. So that led to my airbag light going on. And then when it started throwing some of the other codes, it was throwing a TPS code, throttle position sensor code. And while I was on the trail driving around, it was running very rich. It was getting ready to stall. I was struggling getting up over obstacles because the power just wasn't there. Everything is way out of whack right now. So before I start going off and replacing every other sensor, I'm going to start with my clock spring. Now, one of the things about a TPS code is that they say it can be related to a clock spring. So that's why I'm choosing to do this first to see if that eliminates all those other codes that I have. So a whole bunch of reasons for clock springs going bad. If you leave your top off and it rains and water gets down in there, you can create some shorts. And what those shorts do is they'll send electronic impulses downstream somewhere, for example, that TPS sensor, and it shows that the TPS sensor is bad when in fact it may not be. So enough of that. Let's get started. The very first thing we need to do before we even do anything is disconnect your battery and let it sit here for about 10 minutes, because once you start messing with this airbag, you don't want any of that residual electric charge, allow that airbag to go off. That can absolutely ruin your day. So let's do that first, and then we'll get to starting to taking things apart. With the battery disconnected, now we can get to taking the airbag out. Behind the airbag, there's these two little 8mm bolts. Get yourself a little ratchet with a long 8mm deep well on there. You can pull those out. Now, when you go to pull the airbag out, your wires are still attached, so you're going to have to support that. There's going to be two wires here. There's a short one, and yours actually may have more wires than that, depending on what electronics you have. So just go with the flow on that. And then you have your actual airbag connection here. Now, sometimes these will pop up in easy, other times they don't. In this case here, it's not. So I'm going to take my little screwdriver and it just pops right up. There's no clips or anything you have to worry about breaking there. That just pops right up. So now we have the airbag out of the Jeep. With the airbag out of the way, the next thing we want to do is get this column cover off of here. Now there's 3 screws, not 2. If you look under here, you're going to see the 2, but there's another one that's behind this cover that you need to get to. So in order to get to that one, we'll take this cover off first, and then we'll come underneath and we'll get to that 3rd screw. So if you look underneath, right in this general area here, there's that 3rd screw. With that 3rd screw out of there, you're just going to work this cover off. Make sure you don't lose your screws. You're going to work the upper off too. So when you go to get this thing off, obviously you can see that I was struggling with it a little bit. This piece right here can get behind, there's a little wire loom in there, and it just kind of holds it in place. You got to come from the back side here, work that wire loom down in order to get this up and over, but it comes out pretty simple. All right, next up, what we need to do is we need to remove the steering wheel. Now, as you're doing this, we need to make sure that your tires are on the ground, that your steering wheel can't move any more than what it's naturally going to do, because you don't want to get things out of sequence and then put your new clock spring in there, return things to center, and then break your brand new clock spring. So make sure everything's set where it needs to go. We're going to get a ratchet, we're going to take this off. And to be honest with you, on this one, I like to use an impact because it just pulls it straight off. There's no stress on this, and I don't want to stress those bearings on the inside of the steering column there. So let me get my impact. We'll get that out. Grab a 20mm socket. Comes straight off. If your steering wheel comes off, you're lucky. They never do. You can see how mine's stuck. And now I have to get my puller, and you're going to see there's 2 holes here. There'll be a thing that goes the inside and it pulls it straight. I'll show you here in a second. Next up, we want to grab our steering wheel puller. In this case here, it's just a T-bar with 2 bolts and a center threaded bolt. We're going to start those 2 bolts into the holes, and you want to make sure those get seated all the way. Otherwise, if you strip out your steering wheel where those are located, that's going to make for a long day. Then we're going to take our 5/8, and we are slowly going to line everything up here, start threading this in. And you want to make sure that this pin here is lined up with your steering wheel threaded shaft there. And once you get that going, then you can just start tightening away until it starts popping everything. And eventually, your steering wheel comes right off. Or not. So now we have access to the clock spring. Now to pull this out, you can't just pull it straight out because there's these 2 detent tabs. So when you look at the new clock spring here, you're going to see one here and one here. So when this thing goes in this way, this one's located at the 12 o'clock, this one is at the 6 o'clock. This one up top, you got to kind of, probably with a little screwdriver to get it to pop up. The one on the bottom, you can put your finger down in there and pop that and pull it out. Now, as you start to pull this thing off, don't forget you're going to have wires connected to these 2 ports right here. It's on the back side, but it is easier to get those disconnected with the clock spring pulled out already. So let's get this off of there first. Find that. This comes straight out and then slips right over the side there. Now you have your wires here. You're going to see that you have a tab on the yellow one right there. That needs to be released. And then you have a tab on the white one right there, which also needs to be released. You got to be real careful because on these older TJs, everything is very, very fragile. Installation now is going to be the opposite of removal. We're going to make our connections to the wiring first. And then one thing I want you to take note on this clock spring here, you have this little T handle right here. They put that so it locks it in place and it can't accidentally make a rotation and make things tighter than it's supposed to be. So once you get this thing in place, we're going to pull that out. But for right now, first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to connect my wiring. And one thing you want to do too is make sure your connections aren't corroded. You want to make sure this lock gets over this connection, just like that. It didn't want to go up first, but now it is. Now that those are both there, I'm going to take this, slide it over. And again, we have those two prongs here that help guide this on where we need it. Just like that, it snaps into place. This next step's pretty important. So we have the T-handle here, and this thing is designed to keep this clock spring from rotating before it's installed. But now that it's installed and we're getting ready to put the steering wheel back on, we need to remove that. You won't be able to get your steering wheel on unless you remove this, or if you do, it's going to be a big old mess. So it's a T-handle. You just take your two fingers, pull on it, that pulls straight out. Now we're ready to reinstall the steering wheel. It's now time to put the steering wheel back on. And one point of reference, I said this was a 20 millimeter. It's actually 21. So sorry if I had you look for the wrong thing earlier. Anyway, you want to feed these lines right through. Now your steering wheel, even though the entire thing is splined, there is a keyed spline in one location. So when you go to line this up, you got to find that and make sure that it goes on, because if you're trying to start force something, when it's not designed to do that, you're going to mess some stuff up. So that's on there now. I'm going to take this nut, and on my 2000, it gets torqued to 40 foot-pounds is all, which isn't a whole lot, but then again, it's kind of a press fit, so it's not really going anywhere either. With the steering wheel on, the next thing we want to do is get the column cover back on. And this thing is frustrating. I think that's probably an understatement, because that top side here has that nipple that's got to go over that wiring. You'll see what I'm talking about when you get in there. It's frustrating, but take your time and don't break anything. I know that's easier said than done, but don't forget you want to get this third bottom screw up before you put everything into place here. And then once you get that tightened up, then we need to put the dash cover back on. And again, that's just the two screws. And they go on pretty simple. Then after that, it's time to put the airbag back in. Moving on to reinstalling the airbag now. Make sure that you have it oriented the correct way. We're going to snap that in place. We get this wire connected. Make sure your connections are good. You don't want them kind of half on, half off. Then we're going to orient the airbag where it goes. Take our two 10 millimeter bolts, secure the airbag in place. That's all there is to replacing your clock spring. Words of advice, take your time. Make sure you disconnect your battery. If something's not coming apart the way you expect it to, figure it out before you break something. Going back to this again, my issues were I had no horn and my airbag light was on, and then it eventually started throwing that TPS code. So I'm going to reconnect my battery, take this thing for a test drive, clear out the codes, and see if the response is better and see if any of those codes come back. Hope this video helped you out.